can you just share what is emotional intelligence and what does it mean to you and why is it crucial in our daily lives?
Okay, so I mean, I feel like I have to break that into two parts. And honestly, like you said, a lot of times it's just there is a tendency to lose our identity in the sense of um the way we basically perceive ourselves, the way we perceive our level of confidence, our level of securities, right? I was going to say insecurities, but our levels of securities. But ultimately, when we talk about emotional intelligence, and I find this, I mean, I am a woman of color myself, but I have noticed that very often other women of color, we seem to have been raised in the same exact homes. Like when we talk about our family experiences and growing up, like we all share very similar experiences. And this is not to say that we weren't raised from a space of love, but what I find is in my personal experience and a lot of women around me, we weren't raised and equipped with the right tools to actually regulate our emotions. And we talk about emotional regulation is essentially the relationship you have with those scary emotions. And typically the scarier emotions tend to be the negative ones: anger, rage, fear. And ultimately emotional regulation is learning sustainable tools to help you in that moment where you feel that emotion that feels so strong that you almost feel like you can't take it. How do you process it in a way that's actually healthy for your emotions and healthy for your mental health as well? So ultimately, that's emotional regulation. And it is stemmed from, like, my passion about emotional regulation is stemmed from my own upbringing and the fact that I wasn't taught these things. And now it's impacting my level of insecurity, it's impacting my level of confidence, it's impacting my road to success when it comes to my career. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what do I do?
Right. And I feel like so often as women, well, this is personally speaking, okay, when you grow up with a strict mom who's very assertive and everything, you don't even know how to take on her aggressiveness sometimes, and then you take it to heart and then you don't know how to express your emotions, and sometimes it's like you cry and then stop crying or you get mad, why
This
are you so angry? It's like, what am I supposed to do, be happy about the situation here, getting yelled at and everything as a child? So I totally understand what you're saying because and then as I grew up I noticed for myself I was taking on that aggressive behavior where if, like, say for example, a boyfriend made a nasty comment to me, I would just lash out and say mean things back because I didn't know how to take on that. How do I express that emotion? Do I keep it in within myself or do I let it out? So how do you
exactly.
yeah, so how do you believe emotional regulation impacts our decision making and overall well-being?
So it's a very good question. And actually, I was just working on some of the content for this event I'm working on at the moment. And it really, in terms of emotional regulation, I started to understand in my research that a lot of our primal drivers within us is coming from a space of our emotions. And when you want to make that decision between going swimming or gymming, like you should, to look after yourself, very often you may find that, oh, I don't feel like going, I'm not in the mood to go, so I'm not going to go. Or like the example you gave where you were raised in an environment where, I mean, back then when you were younger, you had no clue about emotional regulation. You had no clue about emotional intelligence. You just see your mom yelling at you and you're like, what is going on? Like, I don't understand. But based on that experience, you are now growing up to see that, okay, apparently this is the way to respond when I'm angry. This is the way to, well, actually not respond, react to people around me. I should yell at my boyfriend because I'm annoyed. I should yell at my husband because I'm upset. And I don't even know why I'm upset. Like, honestly, Gina, I hadn't realized up until my 30s that I didn't even, a lot of times I actually struggled to identify my emotions, or sometimes I'd misidentify my emotions as well. And again, this goes back to the fact that we just didn't understand this. Like emotions was never a thing, right? It was like, what are you crying? I'll give you something to cry about. Or how dare you cry? So because we were raised this way, emotional, not being able to regulate our emotions has actually impacted the way we interact with our environment. It's impacted the way we interact with loved ones, right? We're now getting to the stage where we're yelling at our partners when actually we just want to have a conversation. We just want to communicate our feelings. And I think the first thing to understand when you think about how your emotions impact you, first understand that, look, you yelling at your partner doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person. Because I think one of the things that really affects people now when they want to have healthier relationships is that guilt, that feeling of guilt. Like you almost don't even want to own up. Like some people don't even want to put their hand up and be like, I do yell at my partner, because it's like, how am I going to be perceived by saying I yell at my partner? So I think the first is knowing that, yes, it does impact you. But the second is, it's not necessarily through your fault. It's just that that's what you were taught and that's what you learn. But the third thing is understanding that it is a learned behavior. And the great thing about it being a learned behavior is you can unlearn that behavior and relearn a new one, and understand that, yes, because it has been impacting you in a negative way. And when I talk about impacting in a negative way, it's just that in that moment where you yelled at your boyfriend, it's not necessarily that you wanted to yell at him. It's just you didn't know any other way to communicate your anger in that moment. So you chose. So chances are, if you don't have the right tools to regulate your emotions, you may likely be, I don't want to call it overreacting, but you may notice there's instances where your reactions don't seem to match with the situation. Like you may go back and be like, did I even need to yell? Like, like, was it really that, like, he just maybe just put his shoes in the wrong place? Like, did I really? But when you think about it, that probably was a buildup of other scenarios where, again, you weren't aware how to regulate your emotion. So you've let it build up, and you've let it build up to this volcanic state where you're now exploding and it's now impacting you negatively.
Right? Because if you're exploding, then your partner's going to explode, and then you'll get exploded more, and he'll probably explode even more. And it's like, a big volcano eruption, right? And then everyone's burned. Yeah, so
Exactly.
right. So I was taught, because of course I had a lot of emotions and I didn't know how to respond properly to certain situations or communications. And at this time when I'm very heated up and very angry, I've learned to just stop and say, you know what? I'm so sorry. I'm gonna need to take a break. I'm gonna have to step away for just a moment and come back to you when I've cooled down a little bit. Because I was learning how to work on my anger. I was such an angry person before. Not anymore. I'm very loving. I guess I've always been very loving, but that anger was there from a lot of hurt from the past. And so that was one strategy I had. And then tone is always very important as well. Like if you are in a heated argument, I make sure I check my tone. Like, am I like yelling, like projecting, like, or am I like, hey, I understand where you're coming from. Let's take a look at this.